So you haven't seen me guys for a long time, and so today I thought I would just try a quick example of something I've been making throughout the quarantine time. This is one of my daughter's favorites, one of my favorites, and it's just real simple. Recipe, I thought I wrote it down, but I can't find it, so I'll recreate it for you and write it into my website sometime soon. This is a chicken and sausage stew, but it's a quick cook one. Usually I use chicken thighs, but I have a whole bunch of chicken tenders right now, so I'm going to use those. You want about 1.5 to 2 pounds of chicken, boneless, pound of Italian sausage. You can use spicy or regular. We've got some fresh rosemary sprigs here. It's a can of diced up tomatoes. Today I'm using the muti, which are upside down in the can right now because the top part didn't come off the way it was supposed to. And we're going to mix up about 1/2 cup of chicken broth. That'll just give it a little extra flavor. I use a teaspoon of better than bouillon, okay, mixed with 1/2 cup of water. And you don't even have to worry about getting hot water or anything. It works out just fine. I still have a few of my sun-dried tomatoes left over from Sicily when we were there a year and a half ago. I was just thinking that coming up Labor Day weekend was when we got together with the Sicily group. That was really fun. My sister was in town too, and my brother was there because they all came on the trip with us. So it was really fun. So I've got about 1/2 cup of sun-dried tomatoes diced up. You can use the canned ones, just drain them and pat them dry. If you're using dried ones that are very crispy, rehydrate them in a little bit of hot water. I have this type is really, really flexible. The way they do it in Sicily is with an enormous amount of salt. So you can either rinse it or just don't put salt in the rest of the recipe. Okay, fine. I started out sauteing some onions. So I did this just ahead of time. And the next thing I'm going to add, by the way, the pan I'm using today is just a saute pan. I often do it in a Dutch oven, but today, saute pan is the idea. The sausage you want in big pieces. I bought bulk Italian sausage. I'm breaking it off until I get a bite-sized meatball size. I want to have bites of sausage, not crumbled and ground up sausage in this. If you're using the links, just cut off the membrane and pull off little chunks of it. It works out really well. We're going to brown this quite well. It doesn't have to cook all the way through, but you do want a nice brown on it. Sometimes I'll cook the sausage first, take it out, and then do the onions, just so I don't have to deal with them in the pan at the same time. But it seems to work either way, whenever I'm in the mood for it. And I'm not rolling these into little balls. They're very scraggly, I guess is a good word for it. So in they go into the pan, and we'll saute this. This is probably going to take about 5 or 6 minutes. And it fills the pan up fairly well, but do try to keep it in a single layer if you can. That's going to ensure even browning, quick cooking, etc. You want browning, but you don't want to burn those onions on the bottom, so stir occasionally. I usually like to let the meat sit in the pan for just a couple of minutes ahead of time before I start stirring so I get a really good brown. Gotta go over here and wash my hands. Be right back. Shorter than the real washing time, but you're not going to eat this, so it's not as crazy. Okay. After this browns up nicely, then we're going to either pull this out so you have more room, or just add the chicken if you don't think it's going to be a problem. I usually find it works better to remove the sausage, or again, remove the sausage, then cook the onions, add the chicken, somewhere along the line. That's going to encourage really nice, even browning if you do that. Okay. Here's my chicken tenders. I want them again in pretty good sized bites. I'm trying to remove some of that tendon that can be in here. I find it's just a little bit too chewy. And then I'm taking off anything I don't want to eat, basically. And then big pieces of chicken. Okay? You could even use the whole chicken tenders if they were the normal size. These are the ones from Sprouts. So they're almost the size of chicken breast. Again, more from the hands. Once you have everything all chopped up, this actually goes really quickly. So it's kind of fun. Once I have everything browned, then I add the tomatoes, a little bit of broth. You can throw some wine in there. If I have some red wine sitting around, I'll throw some of that in there. I've even done it with a little bit of dry vermouth if I want a wine flavor to it. But just the chicken broth and the tomatoes themselves do the job. I will tell you that part of that flavor, though, is the sun-dried tomatoes, so don't leave those out. They're really important. And you can leave them big or you can chop them up really finely. If you don't have that, you might try a tablespoon of tomato paste, which I would stir in after I brown the chicken, so it gets a little bit browner. All right, this is cooking up nicely. You can do another couple of minutes. Again, I'm really concerned with getting a nice brown caramelized flavor and look to the sausage in here. That's my main concern. Not cooking it through because it will simmer in a little while in the sauce that we're making, and that will finish cooking it completely through and keep it nice and tender. Again, keeping big bites is going to keep it more tender than if we crumble it up. And then it's more like a spaghetti sauce at that point. Which, by the way, this is delicious, served over pasta if you want to. It's also really good served over polenta, so you might try doing that sometime. I'm still kind of eating the more low carb way, so we just eat it in a bowl like a stew. Okay, let's pull this out. Another thing to notice is the pan I'm using is not non-stick. After I cook that sausage, I want to have some flavor, the browning flavor, left over on the bottom of that pan, as you'll see. As usual, I've just thrown some on the floor, but that's typical. And so there we've got this really good flavor in the bottom of the pan. That's going to give lots of flavor to the sauce. Okay, next goes in some sausage. By the way, I browned the onions in olive oil. And olive oil is a big part of this. This is Costco's extra virgin olive oil, their organic one. I don't need anything super, super tasty at this point because I'm cooking it over a fairly high temperature. But later on, I may finish with a little bit of a really good olive oil at the end. Just depends on what I'm doing. So I added another tablespoon, or really not closer to 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and I'm going to add my chicken. Remember, we've got really salty sun-dried tomatoes, and I have canned tomatoes as well. So I'm not seasoning this chicken with any salt right now. I've also got salt in the sausage. And this, even for me, a salt lover, this is plenty salty. Since we're not using a nonstick pan, you may find that the chicken sticks a little bit to the bottom. Don't worry, as it gets juicier, it's going to lift that out. And we have the broth, all the flavor we picked up, and also the juices of tomatoes. We'll pick up all that flavor for us. Perfect and easy. Also here, the chicken doesn't need to be cooked all the way through. It's actually better if it's not cooked all the way through. Using chicken thighs, just take off the excess fat, take off the skin if it still has it, and cut it into fairly large pieces, not more like 2-inch pieces. Stir, flip it over. The chicken is already beginning to brown, hope you can see that. And it's also picking up some of the colors and flavors from the bottom of the pan, even that quickly. And I'm just over a medium-high heat at this point, not even super high, because again, I don't want it to burn. I just want a caramelization to cook. Once that's browned, we're going to add the tomato. If you're doing tomato paste, add that first. Okay. The idea of adding the tomatoes to the pan first is we'll cook some of that juice. It's going to absorb the flavor of the sausage, the onions, and the chicken, and that'll be a good beginning to a quick cooked sauce. We're only going to cook this with the chicken and sausage in it for maybe another 8 minutes. So it'll be really fast. Tomatoes. The last flavoring we're going to add will be the chicken broth, and then of course our fresh rosemary. And I just like to throw it in. I'm using 3 sprigs of rosemary. I've got a yard full of it, so that's an easy one. Oregano is also very good in this. If you want a dried oregano, that would be fine. Use maybe half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of the dried oregano and add that along with the tomatoes. But otherwise, the fresh, I just leave it whole and throw it in and fish out part of it later. Some of the leaves will come off, and that just gives us a little bit of rosemary flavor. Okay, our chicken is beginning to cook. Getting some nice color to the outside. And again, that's all we need right now is just some nice color. Overcooking is going to make, especially chicken tenders, really tough. So I want to simmer it later in the sauce, but right now I just want to brown it. Okay? If you're particularly worried and you are using chicken tenders or chicken breasts and chicken thighs, you really might want to take them out and cook the tomatoes. But that's up to you. I'm not going to do that today. So again, cook this for about 5 minutes. Once it's finished, we're going to add the sausage and any juices, including any fats. That's fine here for flavor. There's not much. Sausage is not very fatty these days. And we're going to turn the heat up a little bit so that when I add the tomatoes, it's going to come to a boil rapidly so I'm not overcooking the chicken. Tomatoes, sun-dried tomatoes, rosemary sprigs, tuck those in. Stir in the tomatoes. These tomatoes are a little bit more chopped up. You can also use diced tomatoes or even whole tomatoes that you crush up by hand. At this point, I'm also going to grind in freshly ground pepper, about half a teaspoon. I like it pretty peppery. Again, I'm leaving out the salt till later. If I need salt later, I can always add it. And then we have our half a cup of broth. Remember that the juices are going to start to come out of the meats too, so it's not going to be dry at all. It's come up to a simmer very rapidly, which is good. I'm going to turn the heat down so I don't boil the chicken, which will really dry it out. I can actually hold that one. And this is what it looks like to begin with. It's still a little rough. I've got little pieces of tomatoes. The sauce is pretty orange, reddish color. That's going to all cook together, and all those flavors are going to come together. Again, this will take about 8, maybe 10 minutes. And I do want to cook it covered. So be sure you watch it now. So when it comes up to a simmer, you can keep backing the heat off so it just simmers very slowly. Okay? Once that's done, I like to cream it up a little bit, but I didn't want it to be more liquidy because I'm not using any flour or cornstarch to thicken the sauce at all. So instead, what I found works really well is a couple of ounces of cream cheese. So this gives me my creamy texture, my cheesy flavor, but it's not like liquid cream. Okay, it's also, as they keep telling us from Philadelphia cream cheese people, it's about half the fat of using regular whipping cream. Plus, it gives me that nice thick texture to it. Be sure this is at room temperature. So take it out, at least 45 minutes to an hour. So when you're beginning your prep, get your cream cheese out of the refrigerator and let it sit. When it's out, it's then going to be really soft and it will melt in. If your sauce is boiling when you add the cream cheese or the cream cheese is too cold, you're going to end up with little bits of cream cheese that won't thoroughly mix in. Occasionally, if that is what's happening and I'm a little off track by time, I'll take some of the sauce, put it in a bowl, and I'll whisk the cream cheese in, and that will dissolve it. Then I'll put it back in. Okay? So obviously it looks fast. It's actually pretty easy prep. I chopped some onions, okay, trimmed up the chicken, crumbled up the sausage. There really isn't that much to it. Made a little chicken broth. And then this is just about done. When it's finished cooking, we'll add the cream cheese. It's ready to eat. This is good for the next 3 days in the refrigerator, so make a big batch of it. It's great for that. Again, serve it over pasta, serve it over polenta, which is really good, or try whichever way you like. Okay, we're going to let this simmer for a few minutes, and we'll see if I can get back to this. If not, just add the cream cheese and serve it. See you guys next time. Hi, it's about 15 minutes later. The chicken is completely cooked, the sausage is completely cooked, and I went ahead and pulled it out of the container, out of the pan, and I did that so that I wouldn't overcook the chicken while I was thickening the sauce. Another thing I forgot to tell you is that I always put artichoke hearts in here, so I do about 6 ounces of frozen artichoke hearts, and I heat them in the microwave first rather than cooking them in the stew. Otherwise, the stews taste completely like artichoke hearts. So I heat these in the microwave for about 1.5 to 2 minutes till they're just softened, and then I'm going to add them back into the mixture after the cream cheese. So we're going to pop that in the microwave. We'll do 1.5 minutes. In the pan, I already went ahead and I did the sauce, so I've added the cream cheese to it. And I just want you to see the color. It comes out nice and creamy, and it's slightly thick, and it has a little bit of a binding to it. You can also thicken it further if you'd like to. A couple different ways to do that would be if you add a little bit of flour to the chicken after you've sauteed it, or after you put the sausage back in, you could do it then too. So for this amount, I'd probably use 2 tablespoons of flour. That will then thicken as you add the liquids to it and as it cooks. If you prefer not to do that, you could do a little bit of cornstarch and water right before you add the cream cheese to it, and then when that simmers and the cream cheese melts into the sauce, that will thicken it. I doubt if you need probably a tablespoon of cornstarch and water, cold water, of course. The other way to do it is if you're trying to do a low carb, is you use about 1/2 teaspoon of xanthan gum, and I would add it to this, let it simmer for a minute, and that'll just bind it so it sticks a little bit better. So maybe only 1/2 teaspoon. That's a lot of xanthan gum. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. I just wanted you to see here that the cream cheese is completely melted. It's nice and creamy. back in this pot. And I'm going to add the chicken and the sausage, and the sun-dried tomatoes, and the onions that all came out. And the last thing we're going to do is add the artichoke hearts and let that simmer for just another minute. And this is delicious, made ahead of time and rewarmed as well, which I love. And my daughter's over for dinner tonight, so I've made enough for us tonight, and hopefully I'll be able to eat it tomorrow too, so I don't have to cook. So in that goes. Stir in those thawed artichoke hearts and let them simmer. And the very last thing we need to do is to season to taste. So we're going to taste this. Remember, I mentioned it can be a little salty, but this is the time where I figured that out, and I can add a little bit of salt to it if I need to, and if I don't, I'm good. Actually, it's good. I think for my purposes, I want just a pinch of salt, not very much. So I've got some nice flaky sea salt. I don't think you've seen my sea salt or both. Just a small container of Maldon salt. I decided that, if I was going to buy it, it was much less expensive to buy it in bulk. And I'm certainly going to make great use of this over the next year. Hopefully it's going to take me a year to use all this salt in here. This is great salt. So I bought this. They had it on Amazon. I figured by the time I bought the individual packages, this was about half the price. So it was worth it. And fun. So this is all cooked now. You can let it simmer for a few more minutes to get the artichokes a little bit more tender and allow them some time to absorb the sauce. And again, you can serve this over pasta. You can serve it over polenta or just as is. A nice hefty serving there. And sometimes I'll sprinkle it with some fresh parsley and always some freshly grated Parmesan cheese. This is the Reggiano Parmesan, just because it tastes so good. Romano is also great because we have a really nice full flavor with the sausage in here, so the Romano holds up really well. So this, or I'll do a side of broccoli to add some extra vegetables, because you're feeling like you should have more vegetables, and that works really well for this. Or just some parsley. It works great. Thanks, guys. See you next time.